Why don't you get a haircut with your go whine to your boyfriend?
The twins, also known as the notorious Skids and Mudflap, were two characters introduced to us in the second Transformers movie, Revenge of the Fallen. While these Autobots aimed to bring comic relief to the film, they became a topic of quite a controversy and divided opinions among viewers. While some found their antics quite silly and amusing to watch, others felt that these characters were downright insufferable, comparing them to the likes of the infamous Jar Jar Binks. However, there were critics and viewers of the film who thought the duo were racist caricatures of African Americans, with one critic going as far to say that the twins were the first known example of robot blackface. It got so bad that the director of the film, Michael Bay, cut the twins from the third installment of the franchise partway through production, and offered a $25,000 reward to anyone who was able to find them performing when the third movie released in theaters. Now, something you're probably wondering is, how did we even get to this point? How did a pair of Autobots in a beloved franchise become a symbol of such a terrible controversy? Were Skids and Mudflap truly vessels of racism, or were the concerns surrounding them blown out of proportion? Well, we have a lot of different interviews and perspectives to take a look at in order to come to some informed conclusion. But in order to get to the bottom of this, we first need to understand how this controversy of the twins being racist came to be. You see, the reason why so many people perceive Skids and Mudflap as racist was mainly due to how their designs and behavior inadvertently perpetuated harmful stereotypes associated with African Americans that have been long prevalent in American culture. Now, for those of you who don't live in America or don't know much about stereotypes, what I'm about to say might sound a little confusing to you. But to set the stage, there were three main stereotypical points about the twins that a bunch of critics and viewers brought to light. Point 1 was the twins' use of slang, which has been attributed to African American stereotypes, which reinforces the notion of linguistic inferiority. Point 2 was Mudflap's line,
"Can you read this?"
Read? No, we don't really do much reading. Not so much.
Well, if you can't read it, we gotta find somebody who can.
adds fuel to that fire, perpetuating the stereotype of African Americans being illiterate. And to top it all off, point 3 was Skids' depiction with a golden tooth, which aligns with the stereotype of African Americans wearing gold teeth or grills. Now, something to keep in mind is that when this film came out, articles upon articles, in addition to tons of critic reviews, accused this movie of being racist, mainly because of the twins, which was a very bad look for the film and the franchise as a whole. Now, naturally, people wanted some answers, and so several interviews were conducted with the various filmmakers about the Skids and Mudflap situation. One of the first was with screenwriters Roberto Orci and Alex Kurtzman. When they were asked about the twins after the film came out, they seemed just as horrified as the critics. The writers claimed that certain characteristics of the twins were invented by Michael Bay, such as the addition of a gold tooth for Skids. Kurtzman would go on record saying,
"It's really hard for us to sit here and try to justify it. I think that would be very foolish. And if someone wants to be offended by it, it's their right. We were very surprised when we saw it too, and it's a choice that was made. If anything, it just shows you that we don't control every aspect of the movie."
Orci would add,
"I'm not easily offended, but when I saw it, I thought, someone's going to write about that."
Kurtzman would go on to say,
"I think a lot of what we did was following Michael's lead. Those characters, more than any other, he had the strongest instinct for. Our job was to keep up with him."
So with the screenwriter stating that Bay was the reason as to why the twins turned out the way they did, the Associated Press conducted an interview with the director about it. But Bay wouldn't take the blame, insisting that it was the voice actors that made the twins the way they were.
"We're just putting more personality in. I don't know if it's stereotypes. They are robots, by the way. These are the voice actors. This is kind of the direction they were taking the characters, and we went with it. I purely did it for kids. Young kids love these robots because it makes it more accessible to them. Listen, you're going to have your naysayers on anything. It's like, is everything going to be Melba toast? It takes all forms and shapes and sizes."
In some other interviews, Bay would go on to say that the twins
were kind of written, but not really written. So the voice actors is when we started to really kind of come up with their characters. When you work with voice actors, especially with the twins, they did a lot of improv for their parts. We liked their improv, and from there we would animate to their stuff. When you're doing character animation and you're building the character, it's not like an actor where you shoot the scene and you've got it and you move on. With animation, you get the dialogue and then some animation and then a bit more of the dialogue, and you keep going back and forth, and it just builds until you have the shot you want.
So, with Bay offloading the blame onto the voice actors, the press would attempt to hear their side of the story, and the voice actor for Mudflap, Reno Wilson, would say something that was pretty interesting and put a whole new perspective on the controversy. In an interview, Wilson would say that he never imagined viewers might consider the twins to be racial caricatures, saying that when he took the role, he was told that the alien robots learned about human culture through the web, and that the twins were wannabe gangster types. He would go on to say,
"It's an alien who uploaded information from the internet and put together the conglomeration and formed this cadence, way of speaking, and body language that was accumulated over X amount of years of information, and that's what came out. If he had uploaded country music, he would have come out like that. It's not fair to assume the characters are black. It could easily be a transformer that uploaded Kevin Federline data. They were just like posers to me."
Now, this interview is pretty interesting since it sheds some light on what the characterization of the twins were supposed to be when Reno Wilson and Tom Kenny got the roles. Based on Wilson's testimony here, the twins at their core were simply supposed to be wannabe gangsters, and in Wilson's eyes, the twins were posers, characters that imitated a certain cultural style without being tied to any particular racial identity. As for Tom Kenny's side of things, there's no record of him being interviewed about the controversy when it was hot, but he would touch upon it over a decade later in an interview that he had with Double Toasted. When he was asked how he felt about his voice work for Skids, Kenny had this to say.
"I sort of regret it, actually, because I felt like myself and Reno, the other actor who's black, like, you know, not to spend too much time on this, but we were there doing other characters. I was doing Wheelie, and then, you know, the director said, hey, we got these other characters. You know, this is who they are. They're kind of like Vanilla Ice or whatever. Like, they're wannabe rappers. You know what I mean? Like, they're into rap culture, but they've seen it from afar. You know, like it gets beamed up to them in space. And they've kind of absorbed it. So they're kind of like wannabes. You know, will you guys scratch these characters? You know what I mean? And the understanding was kind of that those voices would be replaced later, and we were kind of just placeholders. We were there doing other characters, and so I'm like, okay. And I remember at the time I had a little bit of twinge, you know, like this feels kind of weird, but I'm like, this isn't real, right? Like we're just laying this down for the animators or whatever. And, you know, so that was probably my bad for not vetting that closer. But also, I was in that thing where you're working on a big movie with a big director and you kind of just do what you're told. You know what I mean? And it's kind of what a character actor does anyway. And I wasn't even thinking of it in racial terms, to be honest, that much. You know, it was just kind of, we were just, okay, this is what we're being like those, you know, Beverly Hills kids, you know, going yo-yo, you know. It didn't cause that much of a kerfuffle, but probably 2020 Tom Kenny would say, yeah, I'm not probably doing that, and maybe risk getting fired off the other guy. It never really comes up that much, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. We were there doing other characters, and, you know, Reno was like, it's fine, you know? He said, it's fine, don't worry about it. You know, it's scratching, and, you know, these guys are robots anyway. They're androids, you know, they're automatons. And so, yeah, I probably said, okay, a little too quick.
Now, this testimony from Tom Kenny lines up with Reno Wilson's, in the fact that they were told by Bay that the twins were wannabe types akin to Kevin Federline and Vanilla Ice, and that the twins based their personalities off of what they learned from the World Wide Web. So then, if Skids and Mudflap were characterized as wannabes, then what went terribly wrong in the film for a lot of people to get a different impression? Well, the wannabe gangster stick doesn't really come across in the final film, since the twins for the most part just show up a handful of times and do their thing, and then just dip after their tussle with Devastator. The film doesn't really give us time to connect with the twins, and understand who they are as characters, which is an issue that has plagued most of the bots and cons in the Bayverse. When you take the twins at face value without knowing what their characterization was supposed to be, you can't really fault anyone for thinking that the duo were stereotypical, especially when the film has stuff like this in it.
Don't touch me with the pig!
Yucko!
What?
You don't get Christmas bonuses standing around. You want those new teeth you saw in Sky Mall?
It's my dream.
Help her out.
Now, when it comes to the question of if the twins were racist, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. I recently conducted a poll asking your guys' thoughts on the matter, and out of a sample size of around 30,000 of you, 11% thought that they were offensive while 89% thought they weren't. As for my opinion on the matter, and speaking as a half-black individual, I personally did not find them as racist, mainly due to knowing what the characters were intended to be. But I can see, on the other hand, without knowing that context, how someone can easily get a different idea. Now, a tidbit of information from Kenny's testimony that stood out to me was the fact that he mentions that him and Wilson were just supposed to be placeholder voices for the twins, with him going on to say that they were voicing other characters before Bay gave them the role for Skids and Mudflap. Now, though Kenny did in fact voice another character, which was Wheelie, Wilson did not, with his only voice credit for the film being Mudflap. Now, this doesn't mean that Kenny is wrong, since there were two characters that were meant to appear in Revenge of the Fallen, but got cut during production. One of them was the Autobot Springer, and the other Decepticon Ransack. Now, Springer was cut pretty early on because his transportation capabilities were no longer needed once Jetfire was given teleportation powers. However, Ransack on the other hand did get pretty far before being cut. So far in fact that he appears in the film's novelization, which used an earlier version of the script to tell its story. You see, when Jetfire transported Sam Witwicky's group through a transspatial portal to Egypt, the energy discharge caught the attention of Ransack, who followed them through his own portal. Ransack flew towards the group until his engine sputtered out, and he crashed in front of Jetfire. Ransack then transformed and started to pick a fight with the old Seeker, calling him a yellow-bellied traitor. Declaring that they were going to settle things right there and then, Ransack took a shot at Jetfire, which bounced off of him, causing no damage at all. Jetfire abruptly ended the conflict by stomping Ransack to death. Now, it's unknown if Wilson did voice work for Ransack before he was cut from the film. This is a question that can only be answered by Wilson, and I doubt we will get one anytime soon. But based on Kenny's testimony, it seems likely that he did. Now, despite the controversy, the twins would be featured in all types of media, such as comics, storybooks, commercials, and of course, lots and lots of toys. Now, though most of this can be chalked up as product being created to go alongside the film, Hasbro would continue to make figures of these two throughout 2010. Most notably their tuner repaints, their Shanghai Showdown and High Speed Spy Battle multi-packs, and of course Mudflap's Human Alliance figure. Now, after the controversy cooled off and the last of their figures hit retail, it was unknown if the twins would return for the third installment of the Transformers franchise that was actively in production. However, on May 10th, 2010, Transformers fan Ben Brown recorded a video of a scene being filmed in downtown LA that showed a car being thrown down an alleyway. On his blog, he would give some more context saying,
"Perched on the windowsill of the neighbor goods office, I recorded this awesome scene from the upcoming Transformers 3 movie. You can even hear Michael Bay yelling at people. We also saw the Autobot twins zooming around. Apparently one or both of them will transform and beat the crap out of this tiny little car. Totally awesome."
Now, when this video went up on YouTube, several Transformers news outlets reported on it, and a fan would make a thread about it on Michael Bay's official forum site, Shoot for the Edit. The day after he made this post, this fan would get a reply from director Michael Bay stating,
"The twins are not back in Transformers 3.
Now, this response from Bay was huge since, according to users on the site, he would rarely give a direct response to anyone on the forums, and for a few hours people would take his word on the twins not being in the film, until Left Lane News would post images of two Chevy Sparks sporting the twins' colors and stripes. Now, between June and October, these vehicles would be spotted several times in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Detroit. Though it was unknown if these Sparks were meant to be the twins, it would be confirmed on January 18th, 2011, when images of a toy for Skids would be leaked, clearly showing that he turned into the black and green Chevy Spark. Now, when this news broke out, it just added more evidence for the twins being in the film, especially after their vehicles were spotted several times throughout production. But some official evidence to support the contrary would surface around a month later. Nelson, the admin of Shoot for the Edit and general inside man on all things Michael Bay, would address fans about the Skids and Mudflap situation, stating,
"And for the final time, the twins are not in this movie. Period. End of story."
However, when fans asked him why their cars were spotted on set, Nelson would say,
"Different characters. I never said those cars weren't filmed. I just said they're not in the final film. Period. Bay, who has the final cut, has said it time and time again, so I don't expect for you to believe me.
Now, this answer did not go well with the fans, and some of them started citing the Skids toy as proof that the twins had to be in the film. In response to this, Nelson would say,
"Being a toy doesn't guarantee a place in the movie. In fact, being filmed doesn't guarantee being in the final cut. Once upon a time, the twins were in the script and they got cut. Is that clear enough?"
Now, after this response from Nelson, fans were still skeptical if the twins were going to end up being in the film or not. However, everything would change on May 14th, 2011, since the first ever review of Transformers Dark of the Moon would drop. One of the things that the movie critic Capone over at Ain't It Cool News would say about the film was,
"I have to say that Sam's annoying parents are barely in this Transformers installment. Without fail, they take us out of the action on the drop of a dime. They aren't funny, and we don't need comic relief like this anyway, when we've got street-smart little robots to entertain us. Yes, they're back too, but let's just say they're toned down."
Now, after hearing this, fans went wild since this report indicated that Skids and Mudflap were in fact back for Dark of the Moon. However, a few hours later, Michael Bay would step in and set the record straight.
After the internet posting of a nice review by someone who saw Transformers Dark of the Moon, the writer had not been clear on one thing. He misstated that the twins are in the film. They are not. So I am offering a $25,000 reward to anyone who can find them performing in Transformers 3 on July 1st when the movie opens.
Shortly after Bay's post, a revision to the Ain't It Cool News review would be added stating,
"Hey everyone, just to be 100% clear, I'm not referring about the twins here. They are most definitely not in this film. I'm talking about Wheelie, Tom Kenny, who also voiced Skids in Revenge of the Fallen, and other similar smaller robots, who act like streetwise teenagers."
Another thing that would develop from this situation was Paramount Pictures reaching out to the well-renowned Transformers news site, TFW 2005. Their purpose would be for the site to put out an official word on their behalf, that being that the twins were not in Transformers 3. Now, it's unfortunately unknown how fans on Shoot for the Edit reacted when Bay posted about his $25,000 bounty, since viewers were only able to access the post after putting in their password. However, we do know that a fan would post this image from the Dark of the Moon trailer on the forum. And if you look very closely, you can see Skids and Mudflap in the back of the group. In response to this, Bay would say,
"The twins are not in the movie. You will not find them anywhere. Trailer houses sometimes use shots that are not in the movie. End of story, I'm done wasting my time on this."
Now, based on Bay's testimony, one would assume that the twins would be completely removed from the final cut, especially with him putting up $25 grand. However, this shot from the trailer still made it into the film, but this wouldn't be the only scene that the twins would appear in, since we could see them parked next to Sideswipe when Sam goes into Ness for the first time. Now, it appears that Bay never paid out the $25,000 reward, since there hasn't been any reports of him doing so. And with the original post being locked behind a password, it's impossible to know if anyone attempted to claim the bounty. As for why the twins were cut from the film, there surprisingly hasn't been an official answer, but based on everything that we know so far, it was likely due to the controversy. With that said, this then begs the question of when the twins were cut from the film. And well, we know that on May 11th, 2010, Michael Bay said that the twins are not back in TF3. However, this statement was easily debunked due to Ben Brown's reports of the twins being filmed, and this footage of the twins driving into the Nest base, which appears to be recorded on August 2nd, 2010. This would mean that the twins had to be cut sometime between August 2nd, 2010 and May 14th, 2011, since when movie critic Capone watched the film, the twins were absent. However, thanks to Nelson, we have a pretty good estimate, since in the forum when he was going back and forth with fans, he dropped this interesting nugget of information.
"Most of what is or is not in the film has been decided. There was a final cut, if I recall correctly, before the holiday season last year."
Now, based on Nelson's testimony, this would place the final cut of Dark of the Moon being created before November of 2010, since holiday season runs from November to January. However, there's an issue with this. Dark of the Moon's principal photography officially concluded on November 9th, 2010, so a final cut being created before November 2010 would be impossible. As for Nelson's statement about the filmmakers already deciding what would be cut from the film, does hold some weight, based on the fact that the editing for the film would have likely started in early November, and since Nelson's post dates back February 21st, 2011, this would mean that the editors would have been working on the film for around 4 months, meaning that during this this time the twins were likely cut from the movie. Now, something that you're all probably wondering is what role the twins would have played in Dark of the Moon. And well, thanks to the movie adaptation comic and the novelization, we have a pretty good idea. You see, the twins would have been present in their robot modes during the scene where Optimus Prime confronts Charlotte Meering. They would later be seen again in their robot modes when the Autobots escorted Sentinel Prime into Nest headquarters. And this is where the comic and the novelization differ. In the novelization, after Crowbar and Hatchet accidentally kill themselves by driving into Ironhide, Mudflap gestured angrily at Ironhide, saying,
"Man, you should have saved some for me."
Skids would reply,
"If he'd saved any of them for you, then I'd wind up saving you from them."
"Like hell you would. I could take them."
Mudflap said as he shoved Skids.
"You couldn't take a dump in a dump yard."
Skids replied as he backhanded Mudflap across the side of the head.
"Shut up, the both of you,"
snapped Ratchet, who had quite enough of the twins for one day.
"Have some respect for the greatest of us all,"
he said as Sentinel drove in. As the twins fell in line, Lennox called out to Ironhide, telling him to protect Sentinel. Sam interjected, saying, "Keep him guarded, he's the key."
"Yes, as I always have been."
Before anyone could react, Sentinel turned, faced Ironhide, and shot him in the side of the head with his rust cannon, while the Autobots were frozen in place as they watched the rust consume the upper half of Ironhide's head. Sentinel said,
"I am sorry, my Autobot brothers, but we were never going to win the war. For the sake of our planet's survival, a deal with Megatron had to be made."
Before anyone could react, Sentinel fired a larger blast this time. The acid rust enveloped the rest of Ironhide's head, and the entirety of his upper body. As Ironhide withered away, Lennox yelled,
"He's with the Decepticons! Get all Nest forces back to base!"
Without hesitation, Sentinel turned and aimed his cannon at Bumblebee. There was no way he could miss. No, Bumblebee, watch out! Sam's cry jolted Bumblebee from his shock, and he started to move, trying to dodge to one side, but there was no way he could avoid it. Before the shot hit B, Skids hurled himself directly in the path of the blast, absorbing the full brunt of it. Skids staggered, his knees coming together, his torso starting to dissolve. He tried to turn towards Mudflap, reaching towards him, but he was unable to move. As he spoke, his voice dropped from its typical brashness to a whisper.
"Sorry, bro. Guess I wasn't as smart as I thought. Sorry."
Skids' head fell off, and his lower body fell to one side, while his torso dribbled down the sides of his lower half. And then all of it dissolved. Mudflap screamed in agony as he watched his twin die. He then let out a war cry, leaping into the air, spin-kicking Bumblebee in one direction and Ratchet in the other. As he landed, he shoved past Mirage, and shouted,
"Run, you guys! Leave him to me! This bastard's mine!"
Sentinel fired at Mudflap, but he ducked under it, leaping into the air and hitting Sentinel in the back of his knees, knocking him off his feet with the sheer fury of his attack. Sentinel crashed onto the ground, Mudflap atop of him. He pounced upon Sentinel, hammering away with everything he had. Sentinel waited until Mudflap provided an opportunity, and then he shoved his rust cannon into Mudflap's mouth and fired. Mudflap still kept striking blows at Sentinel, refusing to acknowledge that he was already as good as dead. Then he started trembling violently, and Sentinel shoved him off. Mudflap rolled onto his back and then dissolved, the acid rust eating him from the inside out. Sentinel got back onto his feet and looked around, stating,
"There might be some who would condemn your departure as rank cowardice, but they would be wrong. This one must have known on some level that his actions were suicidal. The only way in which his sacrifice could have had any meaning is if you attended to his final words. In your survival, you honor him, and you also acknowledge that to which all who are within earshot should attend. When it comes to the question of stopping me, success is not an option."
And just like that, that's what happened to the twins in the novelization. As for how the comic adaptation played out, after one of the Dreads accidentally kills themselves by crashing into Ironhide, Sam would say, "Keep him guarded, he's the key."
"That's right, Ironhide. I always have been the key."
"Sentinel, why?"
"I am sorry, my Autobot brothers, we were never going to win the war. For the sake of our planet's survival, a deal with Megatron had to be made."
"Ironhide!"
"I never really liked his kind. Now, I'm afraid you'll all have to join your friend."
No, Bumblebee, no!"
Nuh-uh, no way, not when Skids got it.
No way, bro. You ain't going out like that. It's revenging time.
Well, Mudflap, is it? Or was it, I should say? It seems even the most revolting of Optimus's soldiers want an end worthy of an Autobot.
And yeah, there you have it. Out of these two, I definitely prefer the novelization's depiction of events, since despite the twins' constant bickering, it shows that deep down they are willing to protect those around them like true Autobots. And it's a shame that we didn't get to see this scene play out in the final film, since it would have definitely redeemed the twins for a lot of people, and would have made them pretty memorable characters in addition to making Sentinel Prime more of a threat. Now, the day after Dark of the Moon released in theaters, General Motors, the company responsible for the majority of the Transformers vehicles, including Skids and Mudflaps, would unveil their Chevrolet Spark Transformers Edition. The car was produced in a limited run of 1,000 units for the South Korean market. It featured a black paint scheme with orange racing stripes based upon Mudflap's prop car from Dark of the Moon, an aero kit with side skirts, 15-inch glossy black wheels, and various Autobot and Transformers logos. Pricing in South Korea was announced at 11,823 won for a manual transmission, and 13,326 won for an automatic. Now, though a green variant wasn't shown off, it apparently does exist thanks to these images from wikimedia.org, and it appears that the Skids variant made a cameo in the 2013 South Korean film Running Man. Now, sometime after the film was released, Chevy put out a promotional video showing off some of the cars that starred in the film. Among the vehicles was of course Skids and Mudflap. Now, this shot of them driving down this alleyway is definitely the scene that Ben Brown was talking about, since in this clip we can see graffiti and this fence, elements that match up in Brown's video. To this day, it's still unfortunately unknown what would have happened in this scene and why this car was thrown. Now, something that is also unknown to us is what Skids and Mudflap's robot mode designs would have looked like, since the only piece of Dark of the Moon concept art that we have for them is various different interpretations of their vehicle modes. The only thing that we have as a point of reference for what their robot modes could have looked like is their deluxe class figures. Hopefully one day we will get a decent render of what their robot mode designs would have looked like, since this has been something that has been a mystery for over a decade. Now, though the twins didn't appear in Dark of the Moon, Rick Alvarez, the former creative manager of the Transformers and G.I. Joe properties, would tell fans at TFCon 2018 that the twins were planned to make a cameo in a very early draft of Age of Extinction.
It was a few years after the Battle of Chicago, and the Decepticons were disbanded, and there was only a few Decepticons left, and they were called the Lords of Deception. And they lived out in the desert, and they were led by Lockdown, who was very much a Mad Max type car. That's always how we had created him in our internal art. And they lived in a cavern with like oil drums, and they had the heads of the twins on chains. And every time they walked out of the cave, they would just tap the heads and transform and roll out.
Now, though this unfortunately didn't end up happening, the twins would get a Cemetery Wind kill card prop made for them, but it didn't make it into the final cut. Interestingly enough, they wouldn't be listed as deceased. Now, the last thing about the twins that I want to mention is if we will be seeing more of them in the future, specifically if we will be getting any studio series figures for them. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like that we will. This is because it has been reported that the lead designer at Hasbro is blocking people on Instagram who ask if the twins will get studio series figures in the future. So by that metric, don't expect these guys getting new toys anytime soon, or at all for that matter. And this is a real shame, since due to all the downsizing that happened over the years, the original figures for the twins no longer scale well with everyone else. Your best bet would be the ice cream truck version due to them being smaller, but those figures are in desperate need of an upgrade. And just like that, you made it to the end of the video. If you're still interested in some more Transformers content, check out this video where I break down the ending and post-credit scenes for Transformers Rise of the Beasts.